So me and a group of friends from college were having a summer weekend meetup to party and hang out. I was organizing this stay at the Airbnb. It was a cabin far out in the forest, around our old campus, meaning we have no issues with partying loud, and we could do whatever we wanted to do. I rented it out for the weekend, as well as the 2 days prior, wanting to spend some time there alone, and just make it a whole vacation week for myself. When I got there, I was stunned by the view. The cabin was in the middle of a plain of grass, with a huge forest in the background. I went in and walked around, and it was amazing. It was actually really big, and being so far out was such a freeing feeling. Once I set up my stuff in one of the bedrooms, I put on some hiking clothes and went out for a walk around the forest. There were a few trails that were around the tree line. They were all faint, and definitely not the regular public trails, like in forest preserves and places like that. I chose a random one and started walking down. The forest got increasingly more dense as I walked down, having less grass between the trees, until I found a small opening. There were a few small tents on huts, set up on this open patch of grass. They looked dirty and weathered. I approached them and looked around the site, finding tons of stuff. I didn't know exactly what this place was. It had to be a campsite of some kind, but it was abandoned, with everything left behind, which I couldn't see why that would be the case. After a couple of minutes of exploring, I started walking back before I got myself too creeped out. It was on my mind for the whole walk back, but my thoughts were interrupted when I reached the tree line by the cabin. In the field, a person was standing and looking at the cabin. I didn't want to approach them or even make myself known, so I stood by a tree and just watched as they looked at the Airbnb and walked around it like they were being cautious of being noticed. After a minute, they left and started walking toward the forest where I was, hid behind the trees, and as they got closer to the tree line, I began to hear their footsteps coming within a few feet of me before they passed by and walked down the trail I was just on. Thankfully, they hadn't noticed me. I ran back to the cabin and locked everything I could, every window, door, literally anything, and spent that day just looking out the windows and trying to figure out who that was and why he was creeping on the cabin. When the sun went down, it was about 4 or 5 hours since I'd seen them, and I was more confident that it was just some hiker or something that stumbled by. Their behavior was strange, but it didn't see much else to tell me that they were trying to do something harmful. I went to bed sometime between 11 and 12, but I kept falling in and out of sleep. There was some weird feeling bothering me, causing me to wake up every 30 minutes with unease. In the middle of the night, after having woken up probably 3 or 4 times already, I was startled awake by the sudden sound of something shattering from across the cabin. I got up and grabbed the nearest weaponable object and ran to the other end of the home. I immediately saw a beam of moonlight shining through a shattered window, and on the floor below it was a heavy rock. I looked around the whole room, then went up to the window and looked out. Far in the field near the tree line, I saw a figure running away, fading into the darkness around the trees. Just seconds later, I took my car and drove into town, getting the police involved. They did their investigation and had me speak to the owner of the Airbnb as well, but it turned up nothing. I was able to get a different place for us to stay for the weekend, and we still enjoyed ourselves. Who that man was is still undetermined, and why he was stalking the cabin and threw a rock through the window remains just as unknown. Years ago, I rented an Airbnb near my family in Arizona. I'd used Airbnb tons of times before and had great experiences, often skipping hotels entirely and going straight to looking for Airbnbs whenever I'm planning a trip. When I got to this rental, I did as I always would. It was just after 9 p.m. and I went up to the door. It had a keypad on the handle, so I got my phone out to see if I was emailed a code. But before I could even check, the door opened. A man greeted me as the host of the Airbnb and invited me in. I'd never once met the host off an Airbnb because they always just had a key or code to get into the house, and I never said when I'd be arriving here. so he had to have either been waiting for me or was just at the rental for some reason. Even more surprising, he started giving me a tour of the house. I didn't say much, being confused and unsure what to make of it, but the man talked almost non-stop. Once we walked the house, he asked if I had everything I needed, and finally left. I situated my belongings in the room, then called my parents to let them know I had made it into town, and then went to bed. In the morning, I did a more personal walkthrough of the house, checking to make sure there was no hidden cameras and whatnot to satisfy my paranoia. As I did, I realized one of the doors that the host said was a closet had a lock on it and couldn't be opened. I assumed it was for cleaning supplies or extra things the host had in storage and didn't think much of it. I met up with my family for most of the day, eating out and walking through the parks. I got back to the Airbnb just after sunset. I headed in through the front door and started getting ready to shower, but after not even 5 minutes, the power went out. I searched through the dark for my phone and turned on the flashlight. I didn't have anything running that would cause a shortage, so I had no idea why this would happen. I walked through the rooms looking for the breaker box, but could not find it anywhere. After 15 minutes of no power and no luck with finding the switches, I texted the host. He replied quickly, telling me to hold on for a minute, and just a moment later, there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw the host was standing on the porch. I opened the door, and he quickly walked inside, having a flashlight in his hand already. He said he was just a few streets down when I texted him, but he was here so quick, and even had a flashlight prepared, so I was already put off. I had a bad feeling in my gut about this. As I followed him until he stopped by the locked closet, he took out a key and opened it, asking me to hold the flashlight for him as he went in. When I shined it into the closet, there was a staircase leading into a basement. It caught me off guard and instantly made me uncomfortable. He got halfway down before turning and asking me to come down with the light so he could see. Maybe it was the way he said that, or just a sudden click in my head that made me think about everything and how unnecessary it was that I had to be the one holding the flashlight and go down there with him. It made me think he was using this as some sort of trick to get me to follow him into the basement that he previously never mentioned. Without saying anything, I backed away and ran out of the house, calling the police as I hid next to a neighboring house. The host didn't follow me and even stayed when the police got there. When questioned, he said it was all of a misunderstanding. But when the police searched the house, they found that the electrical box was on the outside of the house, behind a bush, and the power switch was manually turned off. As for the basement, it was nothing but an empty room. Regardless, nothing was enough to prove anything, and unfortunately, reached a stalemate. I'm willing to bet my life that he was the one to cut the power, but what he intended to do when he got me into the basement is something I don't even want to imagine. So I stayed at an Airbnb about 3 years ago. There was no occasion. It was more of just a weekend getaway to spend some time off from work. The Airbnb was a cabin 4 hours away from my hometown. The cabin looked like it was mostly isolated, only having 3 or 4 other cabins within a mile of it, and the woods were right in the backyard. This was just what I was looking for, and I was super excited. When I arrived early in the morning, I explored the property and messed around with some of the cool features. In the afternoon, I sat outside on the back patio in one of those swinging chairs, and as I was looking out into the distance, I saw a man walking into the woods. He looked like a regular guy from what I could see, and I figured he was probably staying in one of those other cabins. He walked deeper into the woods until I couldn't see him anymore, and I continued enjoying the nature. I want to say I stared out there for almost an hour before going inside and making dinner, then sitting down to watch a movie at the end of the night. During this movie, the doorbell rang. I didn't even know the cabin had a doorbell, but regardless, I went up and answered the front door. A man was standing on the porch, and I recognized him as the guy I'd seen earlier in the woods. "How can I help you?" The man smiled wide and said he'd been lost for a few hours and needed help getting back to his cabin. I paused for a second, knowing there was something strange about this guy, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. "Yeah, let me get my phone and you can search the address." I closed the door and went over to the couch, picking up my phone and going back. But when I opened the door, he was gone. He wasn't anywhere on my porch or in the front yard. I stood in the doorway for a second, then closed it and went back to the couch. I knew something was off about that guy, but this just didn't really make any sense. I stayed cautious for a while, but eventually I went to bed. I slept surprisingly well, and in the morning, I got up and went outside on the back porch to drink my coffee, but just 10 minutes later, I saw something, which I didn't expect to see. The man from yesterday was walking in the woods, in the same place he was before, seemingly walking on the same path. One thing I knew for sure now was that he definitely wasn't lost, but then why did he come up to my cabin? I went back inside after seeing that and called one of my friends to tell them about this weird situation. It made me feel better to talk it over and have someone else be confused with me. But as we talked, I heard something that almost gave me a heart attack. It was the doorbell. I quickly whispered to my friend what was happening, and I left the phone call going while I answered the door. "Do you need something?" I asked. The man smiled and repeated the same thing he said yesterday about being lost and needing help. I looked at him with an annoyed and confused face. Then he spoke again. "Can you get your phone and search for the address?" My whole body went cold when he said that. I slammed the door shut and updated my friend, who told me I needed to get out of there right away. I agreed, hurrying to pack all my bags. I checked the peephole to make sure the guy had left before I went out to my car. After shoving my bags in the back seat, I got in and started backing out. As I did, the man appeared in the front window, standing inside the house, and watched me drive away. When I got home, I contacted the Airbnb owner and let them know about this crazy guy who broke into his rental. His response was very short, and he didn't even seem worried about it at all. He just apologized for me disliking my stay. I don't know what he was trying to do, but it had my head spinning the whole time. Even now, I still don't know what his plan was, but seeing him standing in the window inside the house just 30 seconds after I left was the most horrifying and creepy thing I had ever seen. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. And if you do have any stories that you want me to narrate, I would love to narrate them. Link in the description below. And have a great rest of the day. And as always, stay depraved.